Thank you, Mr Chair, and I'm happy to stand up and take a call in part one. I thank the Minister for his comments. I think he outlined the changes in these SOPs throughout the entire bill, not just in part one. Labor would like to put on record our disappointment that we weren't given access to these SOPs earlier. I certainly thank the Minister for allowing me to discuss them with officials and with staff from his office, but having only received these SOPs at question time, it's been very, very difficult for me to be able to go through what is actually a very technical piece of legislation and make sure that we are happy with everything in here. I've had a talk with officials who've assured me that these are minor technical amendments. I note that many a career has been ended by minor technical amendments, but that's all right. I'm prepared to take the officials' word that these amendments are merely clarifying what the intentions of the Select Committee were at that time, and Labor will be supporting them. But I do note that this SOP, the date on it is 9 days ago. It was only made available to the Labor Party today and to other parties, I assume, and I do put on record my disappointment given that we are trying to be very conducive to getting non-controversial legislation through, and that we have supported this particular piece of legislation all the way through. Mr Chair, I don't intend to labour on part one very long. It's mainly definitions. I do want to comment because I think it was a major change in the legislation on the definition of a principal unit in response to some of the submitters who did come along, some of whom perhaps haven't got exactly what they wanted out of this. The issue that we had, Mr Chair, was whether or not open spaces could be considered a principal unit under this piece of legislation. Certainly the existing legislation, which as the Minister and the Chair has said is greatly outdated and was written a long time ago, was very unclear as to whether open spaces could be issued as a principal unit and sold independently of any buildings. We know that we were alerted to examples of vineyards, of orchards and of marinas that had been where the subdivision had occurred under a unit title model as opposed to under a land subdivision model, which clearly was not the intention of the Unit Titles Act. We had to make a call as to whether we were going to allow that to continue in the future. There were some submitters who thought that should be allowed to occur. In the end, the committee decided that in any future developments that shouldn't be allowed to happen. The one example that we thought merited being allowed to remain as a principal unit was car parks, because clearly, Mr Chair, car parks are sold on their own as principal units, and we saw no harm in allowing that to continue. But in all those other areas, we felt that it was important that those go back to being a land subdivision issue and not a unit title issue. This did raise the question. This is the area where I perhaps need a little bit of guidance maybe from other members who are going to speak on this part as to the status of those principal units which have already been created, which are open spaces, which in the future will not be allowed to occur. As I understand, they will remain as principal units. They are not going to be retrospectively voided by this change that we're making here today. And I see the Minister's nodding. I hope that that's the case. Certainly that was the intent of the Select Committee. It took up a lot of the committee's time, this particular part, and I do want to acknowledge that to those number of submitters who were very adamant that the open spaces should be allowed to occur. We did listen to their submissions. We did take those under advisement, but in the end we thought it was perhaps pushing the unit title structure into an area where it had previously been unintended to move, and that in fact where in the past open spaces had been allowed to be issued as principal units, that probably was never the intention of Parliament when they passed this particular piece of legislation so many years ago. We made a number of other changes to definitions under Part 1, simply to clarify in most parts what was the intent of Parliament and the intent of the Select Committee, to make sure that there would be no further confusion as to what we meant under these definitions. But in saying that, part one, I think, was with the exclusion of the definition of a principal unit relatively straightforward, and certainly, Mr Chair, I'll be looking to take calls in further parts where we get into far more of the detail of this.